the one and only Leo Biaz. Hey, Leo.
I'm excited to be back, my man. It was 9 days in Vegas. We got stuck in the desert, and we had a little hangover remix out there, man.
I wore a wig to school once, and they said no headgear was allowed.
How did
spider web
was it
tights.
obvious that it was a wig?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I was
It was a
having
terrible
fun.
wig.
See, this is exactly why we have them on the show, and this is what makes them fun.
You're listening to KXVS, the voice of Stockton, 92.1 FM.
My name is Josh, and you're listening to KXVS, the voice of Stockton, 92.1 FM. Catch us live on Facebook, YouTube, and the TuneIn app.
The views and opinions expressed in the following program do not necessarily reflect those of KXVS, the voice of Stockton, or its parents, affiliates, management, and staff.
KXVS, the voice of Stockton, presents Connections, Peace and Justice Radio, with your host, Bruce Judici.
Good evening. Tonight we're going to be talking about single-payer and Medicare for all health care systems that seem to be a major focus in the election coming up. And this evening we have Max Heinemann and Dr. Kathy Mathis to discuss this stuff with us. They've been on the trail of this topic for years, and every couple months we want to get back with them and find out what's going on currently. We know that there's an election coming up, and it seems that Medicare for All is starting to be taken a little bit more seriously than it has in the past, which is a positive thing, because you know it's being taken seriously because you see it being mentioned by the opposition in terms of how scary it would be. So anyway, I want to talk about how scary this brave new world of Medicare for all would be. And so what's going on, Max, in terms of right now for, for legislation?
Oh, legislation, I don't know. Not much.
Okay.
But it has caught Trump's interest, and he came up with an op-ed that was filled with inaccuracies and exaggerations.
That was just like about a week ago, right? Was that like in USA Today?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
And that has been taken up by Jeff Dunham's. They're quoting those.
Okay.
Quoting him verbatim.
And Jeff Dunham is running down in the Modesto district,
right?
And he's running against Josh Harder, right?
Yeah,
right. And he's the incumbent, and he's been around for a few terms.
Few terms, not too many.
Okay.
2, 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and so he's embracing this anti-Medicare for all verbiage that Trump put out there.
Right, and using it against Harder.
Okay. Now you say that we can just sort of start with that, because it seems to be a theme that whenever Trump mentions something, a lot of Republicans tend to pick that up as a theme that they're going to go on, and so I think a lot of people running are repeating a lot of the stuff that Trump had to say. And so, was there any direct quotes or something that you can recall that didn't make any sense?
Because Max and I went door knocking the other day.
You went door knocking for Josh Harder, right?
I live in that district.
And you had to talk
Just
to
want to let you know, I wasn't carpetbagging.
That's
I really
right.
live there.
And did people ask you about Medicare for all?
No.
It wasn't the top issue.
It was a hot day. I think they they wanted to know why we were on their porch, and as soon as they knew, they either gave us a yes or a no, and they didn't even have to ask us to leave.
Yeah.
Although some of them just said go away.
Yeah. But you had some material to hand out, and some of it.
Well, we offered.
Yeah. And I live out in a rural area, and sometimes people aren't really receptive to progressive views. But
well, I would have thought they would have been happy anybody came out to visit them.
Sure.
These people were
we
in pretty remote places.
Out in the ranch area.
Yeah. So in terms of Medicare for all health insurance wasn't a big topic for them.
No, we were unable to
Yeah, nobody
generate that
engaged
kind of.
really.
Yeah.
It was
They were
kind
either
of
for
sad
it
that way.
and
They just wanted to wave us off. They goes, yeah, we're gonna vote for him. See you later, or no, or go away.
Yeah, yeah.
And then a lot of people weren't home.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I think the thing is that Trump is against the Medicare for All, which is the legislation it's nothing new. It's been around for over 10 years.
It's 676, HR
Yes,
676, right?
HR
Yes.
676.
Right.
Yeah, that was carried by
It used to be the Conyers bill.
Conyers
now
bill.
it's the Keith Ellison bill.
Ellison bill. And one of the things that Trump was saying is he was repeating the lie that we were talking about the last time we were on, the $32 trillion that is going to be. They're implying that it's going to be additional money that we have to pay on top of what we're already paying for over the next 10 years. I mean,
they're saying that's the cost.
Right.
And I don't know, the cost is going to be in that rough neighborhood. But if we continued with what we've got now, the cost would be $50 trillion.
Yeah, because in terms of inflation, and we know that rates.
No, that would just be when they give the 10-year projection. Of course, they're talking about inflation over the 10 years,
right.
but the 32 trillion is a comparable figure to the 50 trillion. The 32 trillion is if you have Medicare for all. The 50 trillion is if we keep what we've got
the
now.
current for-profit system that enriches insurance companies.
So that's the cost for 10 years.
Yeah.
Well, and the estimate was it fell short of the real savings that single payer will bring. I read about this on PNHP, Physicians for National Health Program.
Yeah.
They got out there and debunked it all. I mean, really, there were a lot of savings that were not accounted for in that estimate, like the savings on medications if the single payer were to bargain for prices with the pharmaceutical companies. There were several other ones, but it really added up more to a $10 trillion savings, not a $2 trillion savings.
Actually, some of the specific savings to hospitals and doctors is $504 billion in reduced paperwork.
Yeah, I'm not sure that study accounted for the savings on that side of things.
I just got this today from PNHP.
Oh,
excellent.
Okay, very good.
And that the savings in drug prices would be $113 billion.
Wow. Yeah, it sort of defies common sense as well to think that a for-profit system that is designed that has no cost containment is going to be more expensive than a healthcare for all system, except that what you're doing is you're trading the profits of these companies for not covering millions of low-income people. I mean, that's essentially the trade-off. We're saying profits are more important than covering people's health insurance, or health needs. Not even health insurance, but health care.
But by covering everyone with no copay and no deductible, and several other benefits, expanding hearing aids, eye care, dental care, all of those expansions, and covering everyone, and so that those people now getting Medicare will have better benefits, and more people would have coverage.
Right, and at a fraction of the cost. And when we're talking about, the administrative overhead for, or the amount of cost that it takes to employ the people who actually, do the paperwork. Medicare is like 3 to 4% of total healthcare costs, whereas I have a little interesting story. 30% for what? That's for Medicare Plus.
Well, that's for all under our current system. Yeah, the overhead is about 30%. And Medicare Advantage plans are some of the worst.
Yeah. Well, we got a little story from my work. We are insured with Anthem Blue Cross, and so as part of our insurance coverage or part of the Affordable Care Act, insurers are not supposed to charge more than 20% administrative cost, and if they do, they have to pay a penalty. And so
it was 15.
Well, in this
Whatever.
case, whatever it was, what it did is they said that the letter that we got that all of our employees got said that Anthem Blue Cross only spent 77.5% of their premiums on medical care, and that was 2.5% more than they were allowed. So they were going to rebate us part of our premium, and so that's well and good. Although still 20% overhead is quite excessive. For our nonprofit organization, our admin cost is about 11.5%, and I think that's a high admin cost. But still, 20% is quite high, and that's the sort of thing that pays for, it just pays for executive fees and advertising and that sort of thing. But their response was particularly irritating to me because I'm an employer. And so what we got is they told us, well, now what you can do is either you can apply this savings to next year's premiums, which is what we're going to do, or you can pay cash back to the employees who were insured in 2017. Now, already as an employer, I feel really burdened by having to take care of health insurance needs by trying to figure out, what first thing going around and shopping for the best and cheapest plan, but then also trying to figure out what the best and cheapest plan is for our given population. I mean, so we're a health or human services agency, and so we have some younger women, pretty much all women, but younger women who
they always drive up premiums.
Yeah,
even though they're healthy people.
And older, well, right. So the thing is that younger men,
they tend to, have reproductive issues.
Yeah, and I think younger men are virtually,
What if we didn't have those? What would happen?
What if we didn't have?
Nobody had any babies?
What if we didn't have any children?
Gosh.
But the thing is that since we're a small employer, we have to our population is age rated. So if you're 20 years old, you pay $300 a month for your insurance, and if you're 60 years old, you pay about $1,500 a month for your insurance. And so then we have to decide how are we going to slice this up in terms of our populations, in terms of how much it's going to cost, and so we do this every year, and it's a wonderful time called open enrollment. And so we're about to go through open enrollment in about a month. And so, it's a hoot. Yeah, it's a hoot. Yeah, it's just too much fun. And but the thing is that now, because Anthem Blue Cross screwed up and overcharged for their admin costs, we get to be the ones who have to clean up the mess and figure out how to redistribute this money back in the same way that we have to figure out how to pull the money out of people during open enrollment. It's just it's infuriating, and
tossed some crumbs in there and said, "Okay."
The thing is the cost to employers is never. I mean, people mention about the CEO cost and the cost of hospitalization and all that stuff. But on the employer side, when you're doing open enrollment and you're spending all this time trying to figure out how to get somebody covered for insurance that they can't afford, it's just unfair. I mean, maybe it was easy back after World War II when it was just sort of a side benefit, and medical care wasn't the big industry it was back then. But
people paid their doctors in chickens.
Yeah, things have to change because right now, I mean, it's just gotten out of hand. And my understanding from what we're getting back from the Blue Shield people, the Anthem people, is that their rate increase is not going to be super great this year. And I have a real good feeling. Last time I saw this, and it's been like 10 or 15 years, last time I saw this, maybe it was longer than it was when Hillary Clinton was coming up with back on.
That was a few more than that.
That was a few. Okay, maybe it's 20 years ago. But anyway, it was when Bill Clinton was president, and there was a threat that there was going to be a national healthcare system, and
all of a sudden premiums
didn't go up because they wanted to lay low and they did not want to look bad. And so this year, I mean, so I think it's a definite direct correlation to how scary this is.
How threatening is single payer?
Yeah, the market is speaking, and it's saying, Medicare for all might end up being a winner this time around. Mm-hmm. So anyway, so that's my little story about employer
Of course,
angst.
it's open enrollment currently for the what is it, the Medicare Advantage
Okay.
yeah,
program.
yeah, the Medicare people.
Yeah, and Medicare Advantage. So Medicare Advantage, that's the extra insurance you have to pay if you
Right.
have insurance. I mean, if you have Medicare,
Right.
which is
20% of Part B costs.
now. Why did that ever happen? I mean, I'm wondering.
Well, I think because it's that old saw that you have to have skin in the game. And I'm
think
guessing.
it's more meat and bone in the game at this point.
The Medicare and Medicaid Act went into effect in 1965. And there were Part A and Part B. I don't know if there was even a Part C at the time, but Part A is hospitalization. That has always been 100% covered. Part B is outpatient care, mostly in the clinical setting or the office. And for whatever reason, they decided that people should pay 20% of that.
And that's way back in
20% of an office visit can, especially if your doctor starts wanting you to come back every couple of weeks or whatever,
and
it can start to add up.
That was back in 1965 when that percentage was set.
I think so.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
and it's so now we have Advantage plans that really only address that issue, but they also talk about networks and maybe some other goodies that they toss in there.
Also cover Medicare D.
And then 2006 showed
Right.
it happened, and Medicare D, which was never funded.
Right, that was the giveaway.
Was a big old boondoggle to the
That's all private.
pharmaceutical
The
companies.
insurance companies are making all kinds of money on that.
That was where where the United States agreed never to negotiate with pharmaceutical companies for drug prices.
I'm not sure if it was laid in stone at that particular juncture. It might have been, but
interestingly,
it definitely was at some point.
That became law right at the beginning of Obama's first term.
Right.
We can thank him for that.
Right. Well, no, I think it was passed during Bush's tenure. Yeah.
It was definitely past that.
Well, Medicare D was.
Right. D.
But the law prohibiting negotiating with drug companies for the cost was in Obama's.
That was
so it wasn't part of the George Bush
another grand compromise
pharmaceutical giveaway.
Yeah.
No.
Bush came up with Medicare D and instituted that, and
Obama came up with
and made that the property of the insurance companies, and then right at the end of that. Obama came in, and pharma got him and the Senate to agree that it was illegal to negotiate drug costs.
Interesting. Yeah,
I'm looking that one up on ask.com.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, very good. This is Peace and Justice Connections. We're discussing single payer and Medicare for All with Max Heineman and Dr. Kathy Mathis. And this year, it's now October 15th, so we're talking about less than a month away from the election. And it's just looking a lot more interesting, a lot more a lot more attention, bigger spotlight on the whole concept. And so what can we if it turns out that predictions hold, and I'm not saying that predictions will hold, because I mean there's all different ways that people's votes can be taken and delegitimized and whatever, but it seems that a lot of people are thinking that the House of Representatives could be controlled by the Democrats going into 2019. Now, if that happens, then there will be a lot more focus on something like Medicare for All, because then it'll become a presidential issue.
Well, especially if the Progressive Caucus grows. Yeah, and if more Democrats, and potentially, wouldn't it be awesome if some Republicans would sign on to H.R. 676? Right now they're up to about 120 signatures.
And some senators too, right?
Well, the Senate bill
Is it
is
different
Bernie
bill?
Sanders' is H 1804,
Like 13 or
and
something.
apparently it's not as good a bill as HR 676. So that's something to consider. But
Well, the
I don't
Senate's
know
always more
who's.
conservative.
Well, no, a lot of Democratic senators, I don't know, 6, 8, something like that, have signed on to it.
Okay. Well, it's a start. I mean, there was a time, 5, 6, 7 years ago that nobody would have signed on to something like that. So, anyway, we ran an article in Connections, Universal Healthcare no longer unthinkable in America, and that's a pretty impressive step forward. It's sort of like gay rights in this country. Is that 20 years ago, who would have thought we'd be where we are now in terms of people recognizing LGBTQ rights? And here we are starting to talk about a turnaround in healthcare. The thing about healthcare is, it's like almost 20% of our economy, and so it's infiltrated in just about everything that everybody does. I mean, everybody is touched by
I think
by
it's
healthcare.
second only to national defense.
The military,
Yeah, military.
Yeah,
So
and so the military is also a huge,
yeah.
inefficient beast that
Right.
needs to be turned around. Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say I found that little bit about.
Okay.
So this is from Mother Jones' article.
Okay.
Just consider the source. I love Mother
That's
Jones.
good. Yeah.
So
love it.
when the Republican-controlled Congress approved a landmark program in 2003 to help seniors buy prescription drugs, it slapped on an unusual restriction. The federal government was barred from negotiating cheaper prices for those medicines. Instead, the job of holding down costs was outsourced to the insurance companies delivering the subsidized new coverage, known as Medicare Part D. So, I don't know, those insurance companies aren't doing such a great job of negotiating those prices, are they?
Well, yeah.
Well,
yeah, because they get a cut, don't they?
Yeah. They've negotiated them so that they're about twice what they are in the rest of the world.
Yeah. So I mean, some of these claims of how bankrupt how this system is going to bankrupt our country, really rings hollow when you notice that no other country on earth is doing healthcare the way that we do healthcare.
Right. We pay about twice as much as other countries, and our longevity is 3 to 5 years less than all Western countries.
And yet, like say, when you're going door to door and you're talking to people about stuff, healthcare doesn't jump up. It's not something that you notice until, I mean, it's sort of, it comes out of your paycheck as, part of your premium, or you sort of grumble when you pay a high deductible, or you have to pay an office visit when you used to not have to pay it. Or, it's just these small little bites that really get you, and then when you're hit with catastrophe, you have to come up with a full $10,000 deductible, or it's just a catastrophe.
Well, I think about this a lot,
Yeah.
and what I think happens is everybody's got a story.
Yeah.
At some point, they're absolutely hit upside the head, figuratively,
Sure.
by some surprise charge in healthcare costs. But it doesn't happen to everybody at the same time is the problem. And so
It's not
there's
like a
this sort of
9/11 or
little,
something.
this little wave that, goes through the populace at any given time. And of course, if you're talking to people, say, between 55 and 65, those people have a lot of stories because, their husband had a heart attack or, something. And, they're telling you, oh my gosh, and then we had to pay this, and then we had to pay that. And I don't have that kind of money. And, things get a little quieter when they turn 65 and they get Medicare.
Yeah.
All of a sudden there's a big sigh of relief, and, there's just a little more room to breathe.
Let me give you a little statistic about Medicare recipients. The average Medicare recipient pays 41% of their Social Security for health care. That would
Wow.
be.
That's a lot.
Now that's the average of all
Yeah, so I mean, I'm thinking the 65s. I mean, unless they have something backlogged that they really need dealt with, like a knee replacement or something, they're probably the healthier component of those Medicare recipients.
But
so
on
they're the
average-
ones who are like, relaxing because all of a sudden their beta blocker and their ACE inhibitor aren't costing them $250 a month or whatever, plus the visits to the doctor.
The other part of that is the traditional, the people receiving traditional Social Security. I suppose, and I'm not sure what that is. I assume that was those who retired at age 67 with whatever the full benefit for them was. They pay 20%. But on the total average for all recipients of Social Security pay 41%.
So that sounds like an argument for cost containment.
Right.
It sounds like costs are I think a problem is I'm sure a lot of it has to do with pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, but if we had Medicare for all, the government would take care of that.
Right.
They would negotiate.
Yeah, the cost would be shared. Right, and they would negotiate that. Indeed.
Well, another thing, I if you don't mind me interjecting, about why healthcare is something of an issue at this time, is it whether you have a health issue yourself or whether you're going to the doctor, whether you're getting hit by deductibles and copays or not, you worry. If you're intelligent, you worry because you know that you don't know what's really in your policy. You know that even though if you could read your policy and make sense of it, or even if the HR person tells you, don't worry, once you've made your $5,000 deductible, it's 100% covered.
No.
It's very likely or very possible that, if something happens and any given day we're all in, this close to a fender bender that could be, life-ending or life-threatening.
Or you're this
or
close to
critically.
your health insurance company saying, we think you're healthy as you're going to get. We're not paying anymore.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, what recourse do we have? Tort law or something, really.
Yeah, I mean, who holds the cards here? I mean, the thing is that it's up to a health insurance company to deem whether or not you're worthy or not of receiving benefits, and it's in their incentive to try to keep you from getting benefits.
And they have banks of lawyers and accountants and all kinds of smart
and
people
they
whose
know,
job it is 24/7.
Well, they know these policies because they wrote them.
And to some extent, they have providers who are on their side because they have to interpret the decision to the patient, the provider, saying, no, we can't keep you in the hospital any longer because your insurance company just quit paying.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and then I used to work for a billing shop, or it had clinics, but there was also a billing shop involved in there, in MACT Health Board, and I remember our billing people going to seminar types of things where they were taught very clearly on how you should upcode, definitely. I mean, say, well, did you really talk about that finger, or what about was that an extensive office visit, or was that
listen to their heart and lungs? You can add another extra to this or that.
And now they have 9-digit codes that go up to, so now you can really describe exactly what it is. And every time something is described, it gets marked down. It gets, you add it up. And you take a look at some bills that people have after they come out of a 3-day hospital stay, and it looks like a phone book. I mean, it's just amazing how many procedures can happen, if somebody comes in and mops the floor. I mean, it's like, okay, that's another $15 because, you didn't want to slip and fall. And
a $20 Tylenol.
Yeah, I mean, and it starts to resemble the military. I mean, the amount of money that gets thrown away because again, just like national security, just like personal health care, money is no object when you're talking about either security or somebody's life. When you're in the throes of trying to decide whether or not to do something for a loved one, the last thing you're thinking about is cost. You're not
until you have totally maxed out your retirement, totally gone, and you don't have any more checking account.
Yeah.
Then you have to be concerned about the cost.
Yeah, but still, I mean, the thing is somebody could be, on that gurney, and you could be totally bankrupt, and you'll just say, do all you can.
I think that's the promise of Medicare, though. That was the speech that Lyndon Johnson gave when he moved the signing of the Medicare bill to Independence, Missouri, in the home of Harry Truman. The whole idea was it wasn't just helpful for the elderly, but for their middle-aged and middle-class children who had 4 and 5 kids apiece, because this was the baby boom. They didn't have to feel torn. They didn't have to have that dilemma of mortgaging their home to help their parents. This burden was lifted from everybody. And, it would just be a nice time to lift some more burden off of people.
Yeah, I mean, these days our young people the last
they're shouldering it all.
The last thing they're thinking about is is healthcare. But that's sort of a liability that's just sort of hanging out there waiting for them. What they see is the fact that they can't afford a home, they can't afford education, or if they have borrowed to the hilt for education. I heard today that student debt is the second highest national debt now, next to mortgage debt, and so it's like student. That's amazing. That is just astounding.
Yeah,
this is education.
The banking industry is living off the kids.
Living off of kids and living off our homes. And it's like the banks are just so super powerful. And now we're talking. So this step forward would be. It's just starting to turn the boat around.
So when I was in college,
nice.
Student loans were given by the federal government. The interest rate was between 2% and 3%.
Right.
Now that was deeded over to banks.
Right.
And the interest rate.
Market rate. Yeah, and so but it's more and because it's based on your risk, and I think there were some changes when Obama got in, but of course he couldn't get it passed by law. He had to do things through executive order, and now a lot of those executive orders that he issued are being overturned by Trump, and so we're seeing people becoming more and more vulnerable, and it is just such a time for people to notice this because it's just about in every account we are going into debt. I mean, we have our government, we have our personal lives, we have our environment, we have our education, we have just about everything we're in. We are borrowing against our future, and we're not even borrowing smartly.
No,
we're borrowing money and spending it on things that are not investments. They are just
we're not putting it in for infrastructure. No. We're not putting it into an educated workforce.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
we're not putting it into health.
Yeah, I mean, if you borrow to subsidize somebody's education, you're
it's an investment.
I hate the term human capital, but the thing is you're investing in people who are then going to be providing the foundation for our economy going forward, and it's the same sort of thing with healthcare. I mean, if we borrow and I'm not saying that we have to borrow. I mean, I think we can redistribute. And you're saying that also that we can distribute the cost of what we're spending now and get better care for less money and not have to. I mean, we don't have to go into debt for this.
No, right. I mean, we would have to pay a little more than we currently pay through the federal government, but the federal expenditure for healthcare goes a long way to covering everybody's costs. Yeah, and then the rest, if you want to argue about do we take it out of the military budget or do we go after the 0.01%, I'm happy to have that discussion.
Indeed. I mean,
actually, even if individuals paid for it, it wouldn't be any more than we're paying now.
Right.
It would be less. Yeah. The total cost from our GDP would be I don't know what percent.
Well, you were talking about 32 trillion if we go with Medicare for all, 50 trillion if we go with the same old for-profit system.
Right.
And I haven't worked for a for-profit organization for like 30 years, And for not-for-profit organizations they are perfectly functional organizations. The only difference between a for-profit and a not-for-profit organization isn't that a not-for-profit isn't successful because they're not making money. It's that the bottom line that that the nonprofit organization makes, or a not-for-profit organization makes, has to go back into the function of what the organization was set up for. So if you have a nonprofit organization doing healthcare, the bottom line can only go back to providing more health care, not dividends for people who are investing and trying to get by on increasing profits by decreasing costs or increasing prices, which is, both things are against health care. Providing health care.
Amen.
Amen. Boom. Yeah. So anyway, this is Peace and Justice Connections. On with Max Heinemann and Dr. Kathy Mathis. We're talking about healthcare and talking about how we can start to provide a foundation for our future, and it starts with healthcare, really. I mean, I don't see us changing, the military budget. I mean, we can talk about looking at waste and fraud and that sort of thing when there's some oversight in Congress, but this is a real issue that hits people. Individuals.
And I think that with the coming elections, that the listener has to be careful and understand, these facts and figures sound complicated, but they are understandable. And you need to make an effort to understand them so that you're not terrified by numbers like 32 trillion and things like that, because, that's just
unimaginable.
Yeah, you don't know what that means.
Right.
It just sounds like a terrible number.
Yeah.
And then they tend to quote them in 1 year statistics, 1 year blocks or 10-year blocks, or actually I saw one today in a 5-year. And those all get quoted in the same article. So you have to understand what they're talking about. And then you hear. You think of H.R. 676, that would be a federal, the entire country.
Right.
I guess it could be implemented in certain states. I don't know exactly how they would divide that up, versus things like we had a single payer bill for California. So it looks like probably there will be more bills for each state, or there are several states.
But economically, I think Vermont found that is that if you do if you try to do it state by state, what that means is that makes your state a magnet for all the sick people in the country.
No, that's but.
You would think. I mean, I really do believe that, but according to people who've managed to study this, and I'm not quite sure how you do that, but they say that's not really true. And in a way, you can kind of understand. People are rooted in where they live, and they don't. It takes a lot to get them to move, but in my opinion, that would be enough of a lure.
Yeah.
A state like California could absorb it.
Yeah.
Is the theory.
And if they move to your state, there are ways to finance the bill so that they're going to participate in paying.
Yeah.
The last bill in California had a sales tax. Okay, if somebody moves here to get health care, they're going to everything they buy, almost except food and drugs, is going to be taxed.
Yeah. Although sales tax is quite a regressive tax, and so it does hit people who are who are struggling to get by anyway, and then that would also hit the people who, folks who are...
not to interrupt you, and not to get too far out in the weeds, but there was a big, huge carve-out for that, it didn't apply to food, it didn't apply to rent, it didn't apply to clothing, it didn't apply to the first X number of dollars a family would spend. Sure. So a lot of poor people, it wouldn't have had to pay.
And if you're on Medi-Cal, you've got a rebate.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, the thing about a Medicare for all for the country is that there already is an existing system that every employer has to deal with, which, I mean, every employer has to pay 1.4 or actually 2.9% of every dollar their employee makes into the Medicare fund.
Right.
And so it's all and so all that would be required is if the age went from 65 to 60, so like I could take advantage of it, then they would add a lot of people who are less sick than the ones that they have. Nominally less sick than the ones they already have on, because you would think that a 60-year-old might be a little bit more healthy than a 65-year-old. It could be. And so anything's possible. Could be sicker. But generally, you would say the younger might be less prone to illness. And so you would have those folks coming in, and all you'd have to do would be to like say increase from 2.9% to 3% or 4%, and it would just be it would be fairly simple to change. I mean, it wouldn't really involve adding another layer of new.
There might not be much federal or I don't say federal, much more government contribution actually, because. The income from that group is greater, and then too, one of the big savings in providing Medicare for everyone is that they no longer get to deduct their cost of insurance and their cost of medical care from their income tax, and the federal government gets to keep that money and use that is part of
that's probably one
it turns out there's an awful lot of ways that the federal government is actually subsidizing the current system.
Yeah, right.
Ways that we don't think about.
Right.
It's like every couple of months a new one comes out.
Well, yeah.
By the way, did you know about that tax deduction? Oh my God.
Yeah, really. Yeah. Yeah. So
actually, one of the big ones that really shocked me when we talked about the state of California having single payer. There was the difference of what it was projected to cost was about from what the government is now paying, state and local funds going into the healthcare, and what it was actually going to cost was about $7 billion. Half of that would be saved by not refunding the income tax. The people would have to continue to pay the income tax.
Wow. Yeah, it's
Max gets out in the weeds sometimes.
Yeah, no. Well, the thing is but the point is that there's a lot of savings that are out there that are like I always like to point to the employer cost, but there's all sorts of savings just. All the insurance brokers out there. I mean, I'm sure they much rather sell workers' comp and liability and property insurance rather than having to figure out.
But they're not going to sell as much workers' comp.
Yeah. Then there you go. Yeah,
because it would all be taken care. Well, the part of the expensive part of workers' comp, the healthcare, would be taken care of.
Yeah, and if we're talking about not even getting away from the health benefits, is that a lot of people who are my age are working in their job primarily because of the health benit.
Yes,
and
that would open up some jobs for younger people, because you could retire.
I could retire, and I would just be really happy to have some young person come over and take.
And you could start working giving health care.
There you go. Yeah, I could. How could I do that? I don't know. I would not.
Have to retrain.
Yeah, I'd have to be retrained. So, no, but I wouldn't do that. but still,
you could help people find health care.
Because the thing is that when people get their health care from their employer, a lot of times they have no idea how much that insurance costs because it's subsidized, because the employer wants to keep employees, and they try to keep that benefit as high as possible, because in a marketplace they have to attract people, and so they're competing it with other. I think
maybe that's the difference between a not-for-profit and a profit job.
Yeah, well, yeah, maybe so. Because
in the profit-making world, it's like, oh, premiums went up 3 times this year. You're not going to raise. Like, how the heck do we know?
Yeah. Well,
we're always hearing about these darn premiums. I think it serves the private employers very well to have private insurance that way.
Well,
it's this hidden cost. We can't freaking know.
Yeah, I must be an outlier, because the thing is that when I look at those quotes, and I see that, because I'm 61, my wife's 61, and my 2 kids are 23. And I said this before on the show, it would cost me about $25,000 a year to pay for that insurance, because it's like about $2,000 a month, $2,100 a month, because I'm old, my wife's old, and my kids are old.
You'd be on the individual market. Well, let me just bring up one thing that or elaborate on something you mentioned the other a little while back, about incrementally, say, decreasing the age of eligibility for Medicare. That actually is possibly getting some traction in Congress. I heard this from an actual congressperson.
Wow.
We were out doing our semi-annual thing at the Lodi Street Fair, and none other than our your District 9 representative, Jerry McNerney, came by. And
he's not mine. I have McClintock.
No, okay, so Max's. Right. He's my former one. Prior to 2010, I was in his district, but then the line crossed over and went a little south. But we made it an objective of ours in single payer San Joaquin to try to get him to sign on to HR 676, and it actually took a few years. He said he would right off the bat, but then it took like 3 or 4 years of bird dogging to get him to do it. But he did sign on. But I don't know, it was about a year ago. We were at a house party, and he was talking about it, and he started saying things like, yeah, single payer, it's a really good thing. What I really think is going to get some traction, though, I really think is a really good idea, is the public option. And I just thought, oh my God, and then
public option, that's something that does that still go through health insurance companies?
Well, the problem with public option, say the public option was Medicaid. Okay, say if you did retire, say maybe you had a health reason or whatever, you decided to retire, and then you were buying on the individual market,
and Blue Shield, Blue Cross.
But you had the option of buying a Medicaid plan, and you looked at it and went, this is pretty good for the money. And if I want to supplement with this or that or the other, I could do that, and get a 20%, equivalent of a Medicaid Medicare
hopefully it would
Advantage plan,
provide
whatever.
Competition for the
right, and then the idea is if the government can provide it cheaper, then the private insurers who want to compete against that would have to lower their premiums or get out of business, right? So, in my opinion, the insurance companies are still going to cherry pick for the healthy people, and the government's going to provide care for the poorest, and they're going to compensate the least, and so fewer doctors are going to take it. The problem with the public option is it does not get rid of the multi-payer system, and when you have a multi-payer system, you have to have huge billing departments, and you have a lot of this whole red tape bureaucracy thing that they talk about when they talk about our complicated healthcare system. They're not talking about the healthcare itself. They're not talking about the doctors. They're not talking about the CT machines. They're not talking about the nurses or the IVs or any of that. They're talking about the billing process. And it has to do with which doctors are in network, what's the percentage that's covered, what's the deductible, what's the copay.
What drugs are covered, what pharmacies do you go with, what labs do you use.
Absolutely, and you went in network, you went out network, and then the bills go back and forth and back and forth, it's really because there's all kinds of contention, and so you've just got this stack of people in offices, and all they do is push paper around.
Yeah, and and it's for me who never uses healthcare. It's confusing.
Shame on you.
I think I've gone to a doctor once in the last 20 years. But the thing is,
and why is that?
Because you're afraid of what
because
you're going to hear.
I don't have the
Bruce?
time. No, I don't have the time, and I'm not saying that I'm afraid of the cost, but I just.
No, you're afraid of the news.
Well. But the thing
is
so when it comes to using healthcare, I ask people in our department.
Poll.
Well, yeah, but the person who uses it, a person who has a couple kids who are always sick or who are always maxing out and saying, what is this in network and what is this out of network thing? What does this all this mean? Because when you're looking at those grids, it's just not. It's just not easy.
So
it's not easy to figure
the
out what
young mother
the choice
in your
is.
group says something like, "Yeah, my 4-year-old spiked a temp on a Saturday night, and I had to find somebody to take care of him or her, and I went to the ER, and they sent me home, and so then the next day, my child was crying and had another spike of a temp, and I didn't want to go back to that ER again, so I went to the urgent care. I called around and I finally found a doctor who would see me, and you go where you can, you get what and if we had Medicare for all, you would take your card to whatever place you wanted, and they would all accept it, and they would all submit the bill to the same place.
Yeah, I'm thinking more of an employee who has like a kid who has chronic mental health issues and is always going to the doctor, and then has another kid who has like
asthma.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Chronic, some other chronic.
Some other chronic deal, and then
that has flare-ups. Has emergent moments.
And she's constantly maxing out her deductible, and it's like and she just doesn't make enough to do that.
Don't you know your kids can't afford to get sick? And
the thing
is
that she's fortunate that she has a spouse. But the thing is that still, what sort of world are we in where you have to make
I'm not saying married to get health care.
And she's happily married and everything.
All
but
kinds
still,
of
the
people
thing is,
do things like that. They marry somebody, or they stay married, or they stay in a house, or blah 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 blah.
What
because
sort of choices?
They keep a job because they hate
the
have
job.
To.
Right, because they can't get another job.
I was hearing a story just today about somebody who is in a miserable job, and their manager is driving them out. If they could only hang in there another 18 months, they would have health care for life.
18
but
months. That's
the
a long
manager
time.
was making their life so miserable, they walked away from that deal. And this is a person who is over 50, but not in the Medicare age group.
Yeah, and when you're over 50, you start saying...
you hear a story like that, and you're like, oh.
Yeah, because, these days, the job market is fairly tight. But the thing is, I think the job market is tight for low income jobs. And so
it is sad but true.
So when you're 50 years old and over, and you have payments to make, and you have kids and stuff, it's not easy to make that choice to walk away from healthcare. Especially if you have kids. They get, they get in accidents and stuff. You don't know.
This conversation though about people keeping jobs or people staying married or whatever, just for healthcare, it's a conversation that never occurs in Great Britain. It's a conversation that never occurs in New Zealand. It's a conversation that never occurs in Canada. We must sound like such strange alien beings.
We do. And actually...
and why do we put ourselves through this?
My wife has a friend, married a Canadian, so they have Canadian health care. And she's from Southern California, and he's from...
Wherever,
Canada, in Canada.
Someplace
one of those provinces,
just north of here. And so we visited a year ago this past summer, and I'm asking about healthcare.
Sure.
How do they like their healthcare and so on.
Of course.
It stinks. That's why I go to the United States, because it's number
us
one.
What it's like up there. Yeah.
Right.
And anyway, their comment is, well, we don't talk about healthcare very much here. But he says when we go to visit relatives down in Southern California,
it's a huge.
That's always a topic.
Blah 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 blah. I got a bill.
Right.
Yeah.
Conversation.
Had to pay 20%. Oh my God! Do you know what the?
Can you what can you get that's better or not so good? And
yeah, I know we're spinning our wheels.
Yeah.
Boring as heck. To the folks who have single payer.
And when Obama came in, he said, if I had my choice, I would have a single payer system. But we have what we have, so we have to muddle through with whatever.
It was politically difficult, ergo Obama wouldn't attempt it.
Right, and so
I know people would say, "Oh, it was the bravest thing you ever did to get that Affordable Care Act passed." You know how hard it was. He worked really hard. He sweated night and day.
No, I don't think
blah,
so.
Blah, blah.
No, it was just kicking the can down the road and appeasing, and essentially just Republicans outmaneuvered him totally, and it gave them a punching bag to get the elections turned around in 2010, right. And then and now we're stuck with gerrymandered election districts for the whole decade.
He compromised everything just to get one Republican, and he didn't.
Yeah.
And
right.
He couldn't even get one.
And it was like some sort of heroic act.
Pyrrhic.
When he had the chance to really make some change, and really go for it, make a stand, and consistently that was Obama's flaw, is that he would not do that.
Use those oratorical skills for something worthwhile.
And so the thing is we're back where now we have Trump. So the thing is now we're back, we're stepping back a bit. And so, but, I think a lot of people the situation has gotten much worse in terms of people's situations for their health care. And more and more people are noticing, like I say, universal health care no longer unthinkable in America. That wasn't, when Obama was pushing Obamacare in 2010,
it was
universal health care he thought was unthinkable.
Yeah.
And now it's not unthinkable.
No, it isn't.
And that's just a headline, but that's the truth. It's people have been thinking about it, talking about it.
Something. It's just
there's a fabulous piece in Thomas Frank's latest book. It's a compilation of essays, but he talks about journalists and how so many journalists want to identify with the inner circle and want to be part of that Washington elite.
Sure.
And there's really very few of them who are. And, and then there's a bunch who kind of think they're there but really don't make the money. Maybe they come from families or whatever who have it. Yeah. But, they all poo-poo things like single-payer health care until, nowadays we're watching newspapers going down the tubes, like rats falling off a sinking ship.
Yeah.
And all of these journalists are, sort of freelancing, or they're becoming PR guys or whatever, gals. But yeah, suddenly single-payer healthcare is looking like what the heck are we bashing it for?
Yeah.
It's in our class interest. Suddenly they're seeing themselves as people who might be able to make use of it.
Yeah, and it's a shame that we have to, this country has to have a crisis for us to do anything, to react to something. But in this case, hopefully it's like a 100th monkey type of thing. At a certain point, people all say, "Of course, it's the most logical way to deliver health care." How could we have thought that this whole deductible and copay and in-network and out-of-net and what a jerry-rigged type of system. It's just, who would have ever thought of putting something like that together? But the reason why it's put together is because they're just trying to show some facade of affordability for people, and trying to show, well, look, you have the gold plan. Well, you have the platinum plan. Well,
there is something to that. There is some level of that's my worry is that when should the option of a real single payer health care plan be available to us to vote on or something like that. That it's going to be the inherent class and racial divide of the U.S. populace that's going to prevent it. Because, let's face it, it comes down to I don't want to sit in the waiting room with those people. Sad but true.
Young people are a lot more open-minded than our.
I really have a lot of faith that that's true.
Well,
I hope so. I have to believe that.
Besides,
the evidence is out there.
It's a generation of decision. That's right. LGBT stuff has happened on their watch, and I think there's just a lot more openness to to change. It's just not this millennial group is just not a conservative do nothing group. We just have to.
They're not as outgoing and as the young people 10 years ago.
Yeah.
They're not as outgoing?
No, they're not as politically active.
Oh, well, those kids in South Florida kind of would beg to differ on that one.
Yeah, but where are they now?
Well,
they're out there.
We'll see.
So can I just say? Oh, sorry.
No,
I do think, though, if I didn't mention that Representative McNerney, his newest thing is he thinks there's traction for decreasing the age of eligibility to 55.
Yeah.
So I said, Jerry, we'll take it, and then we're going to push for more.
That's a start. Very good. Well, this is Peace and Justice Connections. We've had a nice, healthy discussion about Medicare for All with Max Heineman and Dr. Kathy Mathis.
It's been fun.
It's been fun. And so get out there and vote. Don't forget to vote, and see you next time. Thanks a lot.